for asking.
Okay. Can I record our talking? Is it possible?
Of course. Of course.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's do it then. I would like to introduce yourself. I would like to introduce you for our readers, first of all, in Portuguese, okay? And we can start. Ok, o Correio Brasiliense tem a honra de entrevistar hoje a jornalista filipina Maria Ressa, uma das laureadas com o Prêmio Nobel da Paz deste ano. O Comitê Nobel norueguês a premiou pelos seus esforços, a sua luta pela liberdade de expressão, contra o uso da violência, contra o abuso de poder e o autoritarismo crescente nas Filipinas. It's an honor talking to you. Thank you so much for the interview, Mrs. Maria Ressa. Congratulations for the Nobel Prize.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, my first question, please, is for you, what is the purpose, the real role of the journalism?
You know, I think the spotlight that the Nobel Committee gave to journalists is really to show you how much harder and more dangerous it is to fulfill the role of journalism. You should know this as well in
Sure.
your country, right? So it is, the mission and purpose of journalism hasn't changed. We're governed by a set of standards and ethics. And what is the mission? In most democratic countries where journalists operate as the fourth estate, journalists are acting for the people of the democracy. We must have the courage to ask the hard questions, to demand accountability from officials, both public and private sectors, and demand transparency so that we can hold them to account. We do this on behalf of the people we serve, because at the core, and this is what the Nobel Committee pointed out, that these facts are actually at the core of any working democracy.
Okay. Have you ever expected to win the Nobel Prize? Were you very surprised about this recognition, about this award?
I was stunned. And, you know, it's funny because Oslo, the Nobel Committee, recorded the conversation, and I felt a little bit foolish in the sense that I kept saying I was speechless, but I was speaking that I was speechless, right? It's like an infinite loop. I just didn't know what to say. But at the same time, when I put down the phone, it felt like, you know, it reminded, I think, not just me and journalists in the Philippines, but journalists all around the world, that we are not alone, right? That we do our jobs, that we serve the people, and that we fulfill an important criteria in any democracy. I think the last part is that social media platforms have made it so that all content is equal, lies and facts, and its algorithms have been exploited by populist authoritarian leaders using kind of like an us against them mentality to get elected. And then once they're elected, they collapse institutions from within. What this shows us is that journalists, the stories that we do, shouldn't be lumped with, you know, the lies that's laced with anger and hate that spread faster and further than the stories that we do. Because in the end, facts are quite boring. We spend our entire career learning how to tell stories that capture our people's interest, their emotions, but nothing can beat the lies and the toxic sludge that is going through social media or in private accounts, the way journalists have been attacked. But I think what this shows you is that, you know, there's a special quality to journalists that most content creators won't have. When you call that, to lump us in with content creators is a disservice to journalists. And that special quality is courage, right? Who wants to tell someone very powerful you're wrong? Or to say, hey, you got to answer these questions. I mean, personally, do you want to do that, right? Because you know that these authoritarian style leaders are vindictive, and they will take it out on you, as they have with Rappler. I had 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years. But that core part of being a journalist, the courage, keeps you asking questions, keeps you doing investigative stories.
We're telling about the lies which are being spread around the social networks, about the social media. What is the recipe to fight fake news in your point of view?
Well, I think, I think about this in three ways. We have the pillars of Rappler. This was always built into the pillars. When we created Rappler in 2012, we lived on social media. That was our main distribution platform. And as social media grew, the rest of the news organizations came onto these platforms. And then what we saw was the greed of these American technology platforms, a business model that former Harvard emeritus professor Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism, right? That our data, everything we post is harnessed by machine learning to create a model of us that knows us better than we know ourselves, and then is pulled together. I'm sorry about that. And then is pulled together by artificial intelligence to serve our weakest moment to a company, that's the new advertising, or to a government, that's the new propaganda. And each one is like a loop, it's a network effect. If you click a link that says you like government, then you're brought deeper into the funnel, because the end goal is to keep you on the site. What's the solution? Three pillars: technology, journalism, and community. The first in technology is that Rappler remains a fact-checking partner of Facebook, one of only 2 Filipino fact-checking partners. I'm also part of the Forum on Information and Democracy, which is based out of Paris, but just looking for, in November last year, we came out with a paper that came up with 250 solutions, tactical solutions, and then a dozen structural solutions. I think this whack-a-mole game of content moderation is the wrong way to go. The platform should be using the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's one. On journalism, we continue doing investigative journalism. But at the same time, I just agreed to be a co-chair for the International Fund for Public Interest Media, which is a global fund. My co-chair is the former CEO of the New York Times, Mark Thompson. This is to try to raise $1 billion a year to help independent media in countries like ours, right? So that you can change, you ask democratic nations who now give 0.3% of their ODA, their overseas developmental assistance, only 0.3%. If we can increase that to 1%, it's beyond $1 billion. And then we can help news organizations like ours survive. Finally, the last one is our community, right? All of these information operations, this is a military tactic. It's actually part of the Russian military doctrine, right? Many countries have used what they call soft tactics, soft psychological, psyops. In the age of social media, this gains far more power because we are being insidiously manipulated. Social media platforms have become behavior modification systems, and we are like Pavlov's dogs. These are real-time experiments. So that we do these stories to tell our community so they're aware of it, and it's global in scope. We did stories when the whistleblower last week, Frances Haugen, when she went in front of the Senate, because it will have an impact on us. If you have kids on Instagram, your kids will be affected the same way Americans are, the same way Filipinos are, right? So that's part of what we're doing. And I think the last part for Rappler is we're building our own tech platform. We're small, but we will be rolling it out in November. And we hope that we can, so what's the purpose of that? To be able to have fact-based, evidence-based conversations and reasoning that will help make democracy stronger.
Great. Other question here. In some nations, even at Brazil, journalism is discredited by president and his supporters. We have here the case of President Bolsonaro. No? How is it possible to reverse these trends? And do you believe that the Nobel Prize could help in that?
Absolutely. This is as much for you as it is for the Philippines. You know, I mean, again, the tactics of calling investigative journalists, of calling journalists fake news, is how power evades accountability, right? So I hope that, let me say what I always say, which is that the real casualty in this shift in when journalists lost our gatekeeping powers to technology, the real casualty are the facts, because the algorithms of the social media platforms make facts debatable. They treat facts the same way they treat lies. In fact, they actually favor the lies in terms of distribution. This is not, and I'm going to quote a comedian, Sacha Baron Cohen, when he told the Anti-Defamation League that this is not a freedom of speech issue, which is what the platforms always say. This is a freedom of reach issue. It is a fact that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts on social media, right? So they divide us and they radicalize us. That's what we see. And when you have no facts, you can't have truth. And if you don't have these things, you can't have trust. Trust is the glue that holds all human endeavor together. It's impossible. If you don't have these, it will be impossible for us to deal with the existential crisis, not just of democracy, but of the coronavirus. Brazil hasn't done such a good job on the coronavirus. Strongman leaders don't do so well, because for the coronavirus, you need to have a whole of society approach. You cannot do divide and conquer. You cannot make facts debatable. You cannot manipulate people. And then finally, I think the last one is look at climate change. We're going to have to fight this together. And I think this is where the leadership is spotlighted, right? The kind of us against them mentality that manipulates facts. These types of leaders, while they gain power for a shorter period of time, in the end, can kill their people, and not in like the brutal drug war killing that President Duterte and this administration is already accused of, but killing through the virus. The lies can kill in this day and age. And that's also something to hold both the platforms and the governments accountable for.
I would like to hear your opinion about President Bolsonaro in terms of freedom of speech. I don't know if you know very well about what is happening here at Brazil. What is your opinion about that, please?
I watch leaders like President Bolsonaro, President Duterte, former President Trump. They have a similar leadership style. And what we have seen again is that people all around the world, especially with the coronavirus, are demanding better, right? Populist authoritarians. Yes, you can get elected exploiting the weaknesses of these social media platforms. And in the case of President Duterte, it was also the mistakes of the political establishment, right? But the problem is that once you gain office, if you do not lead with facts or evidence-based reasoning, you cannot lead in this precarious times of a virus. So I don't really have an opinion in the sense that I am not covering him or reporting from him, but I can certainly see, and I'll quote the Oxford University Computational Propaganda Research Project. In January this year, it said that, I am so sorry, I'll try to kill this one more time. In January this year, the Oxford University Computational Propaganda Research Project, the cheap armies on social media, rolled back democracy in 81 countries around the world. That's grown significantly from 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, right? In 2017, they started with at least 27 countries. Now we're at 81. What the social media platforms have done, and here's where I will be optimistic. They've shown humanity that we have a lot more in common than we have differences of language, culture, and nations. Because the very same platforms are manipulating a Brazilian in the same way it's manipulating a Filipino, in the same way it's manipulating an American, right? Or a European. This is human nature, which is why the problem is global in scope. That's one. I think the second thing is that, and again, I started saying this as early as 2018 or 2019, I think this requires a multilateral solution. It requires nations to come together, just like it did after the end of World War II, after Hiroshima. when an atom bomb exploded in the real world, well, think about this as an atom bomb exploding in our information ecosystem. And the Nobel Committee's recognition of the role of journalists and freedom of expression and facts is one step closer to that. Now we need to have, to replicate what happened in 1945. What did they do? They created NATO, Bretton Woods. They created the UN. And then they created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is another one of those pivotal moments in history.
I would like to know if you could talk about the role of Rappler in defying authoritarian positions of President Duterte, especially in criticizing the so polemical war against drugs.
In 2016, Rappler did stories that put us in the crosshairs of this administration. The first was we demanded accountability from President Duterte, his administration, and the drug war. The first casualty in our battle for truth is the number of people killed in the drug war. It ranges from thousands to tens of thousands within the first 3 years, depending on who you talk to. We should have the facts. That's the first. The second was we demanded an end to impunity of Facebook, of Mark Zuckerberg, because this is the 6th year in a row that Filipinos spend the most time online and on social media. Facebook is our internet. It does a lot of good, but in the last 5 or 6 years, it has done tremendous bad, like crossing into evil bad. We're a partner of Facebook, right? I know that technology is going to be a part of our future, and the sooner the people who run these American companies realize that they have to operate with enlightened self-interest, that they cannot destroy democracy and trust and the public sphere. So I keep hoping for that. But in lieu of that, now I hope we see that different governments are coming together. The EU has a democracy action plan, and the United States is looking at legislation as well. But waiting for legislation is long. It's certainly not going to be able to help the Philippines in our May 2022 presidential elections, right? Our elections will be a battle for facts, because 35 years after Filipinos ousted the Marcos family and forced them to flee into exile in People Power Revolt in 1986, the son of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Bongbong Marcos, had filed his certificate of candidacy and is running for president. So this is going to be an interesting and pivotal race.
Okay. Other question. I'm sorry for taking your time, but it's an honor. It's extremely important for us. How could journalism be used as a tool against authoritarian regimes, in your point of view?
Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. This new world puts all journalists on the same side, regardless of what news organization you report for. And it's a tough lesson for Filipino journalists to realize we no longer live in the world where the competition is news organization against news organization. In fact, we should be collaborating a lot more in terms of investigative reports, right? If we don't collaborate, I'll tell you what we saw happen in the Philippines. In 2016, when we mapped the information ecosystem on Facebook, news organizations were at the center. And then over time, we watched news organizations push to the side. And in the center of our information ecosystem are manufactured online sites, right? Like, it's kind of like Alex Jones, they take grains of truth and then twist it so that it's a lie. It's a meta-narrative that's a lie, and it's spread repeatedly. And, I understand the tech platforms have a difficult time, because essentially what they're going to have to do, this is like an arms race. Every time they come up with a tactic that will take some accounts down, more will learn from that tactic and then evolve. Well, guess what? They're also making a lot of money, and they should spend some of that money to protect the public.
In a world full of lies in social networks, do you still see a promissory future for journalism? Is journalism still alive?
Journalism is not only alive, it is also a time of creative destruction. I'm going to use that economic term because technically, Rappler, when the government filed all these cases against us, we should have gone bankrupt at the end of 2018. We saw it when the government in January 2018 tried to shut us down. And then they called our advertisers. You know, by April 2018, we dropped 50%, 49% exactly of our advertising. And so we were forced to look at everything we were doing. And one of the things we were doing is disinformation research. And we realized that every person and every company is going to need to understand the online world in the way that we take it apart. So that became a sustainable. We handed it over to a different team to create a product that we could then use as a sustainable business model. Let me end it with this. You know, there is no better time to be a journalist, because if you are a journalist today, you are leaving behind the old world and you are helping create the new world. Journalism will always be there because it is the courage to speak truth to power that underlies the search for facts in every country around the world.
Okay, may I have just two more questions? Okay, okay.
Yeah.
The other laureate, Mr. Dmitry Muratov, lost 6 colleagues which were killed because they were doing journalism. During these years, what kind of threats did you face for doing your job in Rappler?
I hope that doesn't happen, and I knock on wood, right? Like, but I'll say first, online attacks, so psychological. In this day and age, in the age of social media, you no longer have to kill a journalist. You just have to kill the journalist's credibility. You just have to turn the people against journalism, right? And you see this happening in Pakistan. I mean, this is actually, you see this happening in every country around the world where there's a vibrant democracy. And it comes from the Russian military doctrine, which is, you know, you're not trying to get the public to believe one thing. You're trying to get them to distrust everything. Because a public that doesn't trust is a public that cannot hold power to account. Right? Trust is the glue that holds our societies together. Trust is what makes us think that the car at the stoplight will stop when it's red, right? So even laws are built on trust. What happened to us is we were attacked. I personally received at least 90 hate messages per hour in 2016 after we published our reports on the information operations, the propaganda war. And then and I am old, right? But our young reporters who were then in their 20s were attacked the same way. We saw the data, journalists, women were attacked at least 10 times more than men. So there's this bottom-up attack that creates a manufactured reality, right? So if you don't know Rappler or me, there's all of these, it's like gossip, but it tears you down. And then in 2017, the government, President Duterte himself came top down to say we're journalists are criminals. A week later, lawfare happened, the weaponization of the law. That's when I got my first subpoena. Rappler got its first subpoena. 2018 was all about filing cases against Rappler, 11 in that year. 2019 was when I got arrest warrants. I was arrested. So 2019 was all about arrest.
You had
10 arrest warrants.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I was convicted in June for a story I didn't write, edit, or supervise at a time when the law I supposedly violated didn't even exist. And Rappler was found innocent, right? So I was convicted, but Rappler, I was like, okay, how did I do that? Anyway, I don't want to tell them to also convict Rappler. So I try not to say it, but please go ahead. Finally, 2020, I got my 10th arrest warrant. I think that the goal here is to tear down facts. And when it is a battle for facts, which it is, journalism is activism. And I've said this repeatedly now.
It's very beautiful. Well, what kind of message would you send for journalists throughout the world, and especially also for students of journalism? I think they are inspired by you. It's my case. I was very happy with the Nobel Prize for you and for Mr. Muratov. I think the whole community of journalists are very happy. What kind of message would you send?
I mean, first, a thank you to the Nobel Committee for choosing to shine the light on what journalists are going through around the world, how hard it is, how much we have to sacrifice, how journalists are getting jailed or killed just for doing their jobs. It has gotten worse. If you're a young journalist today, this is the best time to be a journalist, because you're not following in anyone's path. We maintain the standards and ethics and the mission of journalism, but what journalism will become, we're creating it right now, right? So I guess it's a challenge to our societies to also realize that they cannot bury their heads. They can't pretend they don't see. Because what social media has also done is it has made democracy a man-to-man or woman-to-woman defense. If you play basketball, I used to play basketball, it's like you can no longer do zone where, you stick in your little corner. You have to, in your area of influence, protect the facts. You must. Because if we can stitch all of that together along with the news organizations, then we have a fighting chance. But I think the last part is that I said creative destruction, right? So the old world, like in everything else, after we all step out of lockdown, I hope you do soon, Brazil, after coronavirus, and the world will never be the same. And when we come out of lockdown, we're going to be stepping on the rubble of the world that was. The question to everyone is, what kind of world are we going to build? And that is the challenge in front of journalists all around the world today.
Okay, thank you so much. It's such an honor talking to you. Take care, and it's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry to keep you up so late. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.